Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Community Information Forum. Thank you for your interest in learning more about our March 11th bond referendum. Our goal this evening is to help make sure that everybody gets information to make an informed decision and be ready to vote on March 11th, and to get details on our proposal for our referendum. Tonight, we have our panel of experts who can explain different parts of the referendum. We'll have insight from district staff about how the proposed improvements would have a positive impact on their learning environments and our students, details about the proposed projects included in the referendum, and how our district strategy for fiscal responsibility continues with this bond referendum. There will be time for questions at the end. We do aim to wrap our presentation up in about an hour, so that would be 7 o'clock, so that we can move on to the question and answer period. Tonight, you'll hear from me. I'm Neil Dickstein, Superintendent in the Freehold Township School District, and I'll be moderating this evening's forum. We also have Michael Amoroso, our Board of Education President, Bob DeVita, our Business Administrator, Diane Brethauer, Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Kathy Arman, Principal at the Erickson Elementary School. We have Tony Solomini, who is our Bond Counsel, Robbie Akampora, our Financial Advisor, Steve Siegel, Architect, and Ulka Panchal, our architect. We'll start off this evening by giving you an overview of the bond referendum process and why the board believes it is a fiscally responsible option to address our much needed improvements. Then you'll hear from our district's financial advisor, then our architect, who will give you a list of proposed projects with some details, and then we'll take your questions. I do want to give you an overview about our school district. We are a pre-kindergarten through 8th grade school district. After graduating 8th grade, our students do attend the Freehold Regional High School District, which is exclusively a 9-12 school district. We have 8 schools in our school district and serve approximately 3,500 students. Supervising those students are about 850 staff members, and more than a third of those staff members do live in Freehold Township. I'm included in that count. I do live in Freehold Township as well. I have one child currently in our school district and one child who is a senior at Freehold Borough High School. Next, I'm going to move on to Bob DeVita, our Business Administrator, who can give you a little bit more background on the fiscal responsibility component of this referendum.
Thank you, Mr. Dickstein. 2 quick points on school-based budgeting. Unfortunately, the state of New Jersey is the only state in the union that relies almost solely on local property taxes to fund our schools. So our board, when they build their budgets annually, they're well aware of this fact. Freehold Township schools are 89% funded through local property taxes. The other 11% comes from state aid, from surplus, and from any other revenues we are able to generate. The other key point about school-based budgeting is that we are a revenue-generated budget. What that means is that the state says, you could spend whatever revenue you earned as long as you don't increase your local tax levy by more than 2% every year. Now, there are some exceptions to increasing that tax levy greater than 2%, one of them being for increased healthcare costs. I would tell you that this is the 11th budget that I'll be building this year with this board, and we have stayed within 2%, I believe 9 of those 11 years. We've had 2 other years where we have had to use some of the healthcare waiver that's there. So this board is very fiscally conscious. They want to do the best for our students as well as the taxpayers. So that is a little bit about school-based budgeting. In terms of how we maintained our buildings up until this point in time, we've spent $28 million over the last decade on improving our facilities. We have been able to do that through 3 things: capital reserve. Anytime we end our year and we have some savings there, this board has been very prudent in putting money away as a rainy day fund to take care of some of these necessary projects. We've also taken advantage of other opportunities the state's provided in the form of an energy savings improvement plan, which we're able to get about $6.5 million for the projects done, as well as currently we have 2 projects that will be done this summer at Erickson and at the Applegate School for rooftop units, called a ROD grant. In this case, the state will provide up to 40% of the funding, and we are providing the other 60% of the funding through our capital reserve account. We have also, over the last decade, spent on average $1.3 million or $13 million in aggregate on maintaining our facilities. Now, I will tell you that we are in a predicament right now where our last referendum was in 2001. And by the time 2004 rolled around, and in addition to putting additions and building the West Freehold School, we improved our infrastructure. We replaced unit ventilators, rooftop units, HVAC controls, fire alarms. All of our existing infrastructure was replaced. All that infrastructure is now at the end or beyond its useful life. We've had a few facility issues over the last 2 or 3 years. It seems like every morning at 7 o'clock, I get a phone call about something that's failed. When our systems are beyond their useful life, we run into several problems. One, they no longer make parts. And when they no longer make parts, we are forced to provide alternate methods of heating and cooling our buildings. So I'm going to move my chair for a second. What you'll see behind me, when our unit ventilators break, and I think mine broke about 8 years ago, we install portable heating and cooling units. They are not as effective or as efficient as what the UV itself will provide. Last year, I believe we installed over 50 of these portable units district-wide due to failing facility issues with our HVAC and our unit ventilators. We also are in a position right now where a lot of our HVAC and unit ventilators, they run on an old, outdated form of Freon called R22. The EPA, sometime after our last referendum, outlawed R22. And so whatever's on the shelves is all that we can get our hands on. We went from paying about $300 a canister to about $1,500 a canister over the last decade. When R22 runs out, if we have to recharge any of our existing air conditioning units, we will not be able to do so, and we will not be able to provide cooling to our schools. So we're in a position right now where we have done a lot over the last decade to maintain our facilities, but unfortunately, it's time to have a lot of these systems replaced. And at this point in time, I will turn this back over to Mr. Amoroso.
Thanks, Bob. So this referendum planning process, it began about 1.5 years ago, but we've been considering this for many years now. The planning process included enlisting the help of the district's architect, who's on this webinar tonight. And we completed a comprehensive facility study to try to identify the needs across the district. And these needs were considered with our students and staff members in mind, but also the taxpayers of our community. This is a slimmed down proposal. Originally, we looked at over $200 million worth of improvements, and those were kind of the wants. But then we sat down with the professionals, and the Board of Education agreed that we had to select the most vital projects and those that qualify for the most state aid. This is a bond referendum. It's simply a vote. We're putting this important decision in the hands of our community members. So on Tuesday, March 11th, the board is going to ask voters for permission to borrow money through bond sales to complete these large-scale projects. I'm going to ask Mr. DeVito to talk about a few more reasons why we're pursuing this referendum.
So, as we've said before, our infrastructure is in a bad spot right now where it's at the end of its useful life. Roofs are out of warranty. HVAC equipment's hard to find Freon or to get replacement parts. The main reason that the board decided to go out for referendum is money. If the taxpayers of Freehold Township approve this bond referendum, the state will pay up to 40% of the eligible cost of these projects. Now, that's key. So these projects need to be done one way or the other. And if we don't pass a referendum, Freehold Township taxpayers will pay for 100% of the cost of these projects. Passing a bond referendum is the only way that the state will provide funding of up to 40% for these projects. Now, a bond referendum works much like when you have you take money out for your home mortgage. You get the money up front, and then you pay it back over a period of time. In the case of the bond referendum, we would get the money up front, complete the projects over 2 or 3 years, and then we would pay it back over a 20-year period of time. Another way to think of a bond referendum is if you have a significant capital improvement to do on your home and you have to borrow money through a home equity loan. Again, you have all the funds come up front, you have the projects done, and then you spread that cost over a period of time. That's what we're looking to do with the bond referendum. Now, this, as we talked about before, our general fund budget is funded primarily through property taxes. This 40% debt service funding comes from the other taxes that we all pay to the state of New Jersey: income tax, fees, and sales tax. So recently, our neighbors in Manalapan, Englishtown, they passed a $115 million bond referendum question. Their budgets going forward will enjoy dollars from all the taxpayers across the state, including Freehold Township, from those other methods I just spoke about. The only way for Freehold Township residents to get some of their own money back to pay for the capital projects that its local school district needs is by passing the bond referendum. And at this point in time, I would believe to turn it back over to Mr. Dickstein.
Thank you. So many of you might be wondering what happens if the bond referendum doesn't pass. First, we know that there would be no state aid to offset the project costs. As Mr. DeVita shared, 100% of the cost of these projects, which are all necessities, would be out of Freehold Township taxpayer property taxes. So it's important that to understand that the only way to avail ourselves of up to 40% of the eligible costs, or $45 million that doesn't come out of taxpayer dollars, would be through this referendum in the form of state aid. We would also have to prioritize our needs. When you pass a bond referendum, the money is given up front and then paid back. In this case, we would have to do it over a longer period of time, so immediate needs would have to be addressed first. We wouldn't be able to do all of the necessities at once. We would unfortunately have to take all of the security updates that you'll learn about this evening and put them aside, because our facility needs impact our operation in many cases, so they would have to be addressed first. Examples of those are HVAC and roofing. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've had to relocate students within schools because of HVAC failure, boiler failure, and hot water heater failure. So these are starting to become emergencies, and they would have to be addressed first. Of course, our goal would be to minimize the impact on our students. We don't want to impact class size, and we don't want to impact program, but we also need to provide our students and our staff a safe and healthy learning environment in which to come every day. And it would be irresponsible to not do that. Next, I'll turn the program over to our financial advisor, Robbie Akampora, and our bond counsel, Tony Salamini.
I think Tony's going to go first.
Good evening, everyone. Tony Salamini from Lenz, Goldman and Spitzer. Bob DeVita did such a great job explaining the real benefits of a referendum, and I can't reiterate and stress enough the benefit of that debt service aid to the district, especially where almost all of your projects are eligible for aid. That up to 34% that you guys are going to get in debt service aid is really a huge benefit to doing the referendum, and really is a lot of school districts, as Bob mentioned, throughout the state are using that as a planning tool. Additionally, everyone's usually concerned when they approve a bond referendum because they think about it just like they do for projects at their own house. And I don't know about anyone in the audience, but every project I've ever done in my own house is more expensive than I thought it was going to be. That cannot be the case here with this project. The board is not legally authorized, assuming the referendum passes, to spend $1 more than you guys, the voters, authorize. So as a member of the public, that should really give you comfort that this is the maximum amount of dollars that the board can spend on these projects. And to make sure that happens, your architect, who's a very experienced school architect, has included contingency in with their plans, escalation, and conservative estimating. So the board will not spend $1 more. They're not legally permitted. Another safeguard that's put in place for the public is, again, after the referendum, this debt is sold, and it's sold on a competitive basis. So we get the lowest interest rate possible based on the market at the time we sell the bonds. So these bonds have to go to the lowest interest cost to the taxpayers, meaning they just can't be awarded to anyone. The loan can't be awarded to any financial institution. It's the best economic deal for you, the taxpayer. And right now, during the planning process, that's what your financial advisor has done, is done estimates to see what that potential cost is. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robbie Akampora from Phoenix Advisors.
Thanks, Tony. So we're the financial advisors. We did the tax impact analysis for the district once it was determined what the projects were going to be that were the priority for the district. And the average tax impact based on the average assessed home, and I'll get into that in a minute, is $37 per month. Okay, that's after the state aid that we've talked about has been applied. And we've mentioned the state aid of $45 million. That is based on the principal amount of the project. So every year the district's paying debt service for 20 years. The state's going to be paying principal and interest on that target amount of $45 million. So I just kind of want to make that clear that they're paying this principal and interest according to that portion. So I mentioned the average assessed home. The average assessed home in Freehold is $611,000. Probably most everyone's home value is higher. So the market value is always higher than the assessed value. So that's something to keep in mind. The taxes are levied based on the assessed value of a home, not the market value. Now, if your assessed value is higher than $611,000, there is a tool on the district's website that you can calculate the estimate for your home for the tax impact. So that's important to do. The referendum is approved in March. We're going to be selling the bonds to close in July of 2025. We'll have a payment 1 year after that. So the first payment occurs in July of 2026. And for school districts, that's the 26-27 school fiscal year. So it's important to think about that. This is not going to kick in and affect your taxes in this calendar year and not even half of the next calendar year. It's not going to affect until July of 2026. We mentioned that we're selling these bonds for 20 years. We used an estimate of 4% for the borrowing rate for these bonds. These are tax exempt municipal bonds. So the rate is much lower than what you or I would get on a mortgage if we were out in the market to get a mortgage today. You know, we estimate these rates months and months before the referendum. So we try to be conservative. We estimated at 4%. We've had a couple of bond sales this week that were comparable, and those rates came in at 367 to 375. So, you know, we hope that when we sell these bonds, it's going to be lower than 4%, and the impact is going to be lower than what we've discussed. So I think it's important to know the assumptions that we did to get to this $37 a month. The 20-year life of the bond is going to be set up. We're going to sell the bonds competitively, as Tony mentioned. And I think it's important to know that the residents over the next 20 years in Freehold Township are the ones that are going to pay for the bonds. It's not a balloon payment. The payments are structured over 20 years. The day we sell the bonds, they're going to be set in stone. Now, we will have the ability to refinance the bonds if rates drop, and there's a calculation that the state requires. They don't just let you continue to refinance all the time. You have to achieve a certain level of savings. So we will have a call provision in. Right now with the federal tax laws, we will put a call provision in that after 7 years, we can refinance if we can achieve those savings. So if rates do decrease, we will refinance the bonds to save money for the district. The district does have debt. I think Bob mentioned before the last referendum. The debt is getting paid off in 2031-32. So at that time, the district taxpayers are going to experience a slight decrease each year because those bonds are going to be paid off. So there is an overlap between 2026 when we sell the bonds and 2031-32. But after that old bonds, can call them, kind of go away. Tony mentioned that they're sold on a competitive basis, and I've mentioned they are municipal bonds, but by law they have to be sold on a competitive basis. So we open the bids electronically on the day of the sale, which would probably be late June or early July this year. I think that's pretty much I didn't mention the senior citizen tax freeze. You know, that's an option that the state implemented a number of years ago. There are requirements to qualify. I know there's a requirement that you have to live in the town for a certain number of years, and there are income requirements to be able to qualify. But there is information on the website for that, and the income level has just been increased. I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head, but that is something that's important for senior citizens to look into, because this tax freeze can literally freeze your taxes at a certain level and they will not go up. That's a program that the state of New Jersey has implemented. And at the time, but later, I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has. Neil?
The senior freeze, the income limit was raised to about $168,000, and also on our website, and we'd be able to share if anybody needs that information. Is a new program called Stay New Jersey that has a $500,000 income eligibility requirement. As I've said before, every one of our schools is impacted by this referendum, and there's projects that will be completed at all 8 buildings in the district. The projects would be done with the help of that state aid to offset the cost to the taxpayers. The referendum is focused in 2 different areas: boosting health and efficiency and increasing safety and security. To talk a little bit about safety and security, I'd like to introduce Diane Brethauer, our Assistant Superintendent of Schools.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for taking the time out to join us this evening. Part of my role as one of our assistant superintendents is I wear the school safety specialist hat. And with that comes a tremendous amount of responsibility. We have plans and protocols in place daily, and they are boosted pretty much daily to keep everyone safe, all the children safe, all the staff members safe. One of the strategies we employ is an international strategy. It's called target hardening. The idea is that if you make it more difficult for criminals to do harm, they will go somewhere else. And so the goal is to strengthen the security of each of our buildings. We already do things to harden our targets. We ask our staff members to wear ID badges. We ask our staff members to have placards in their cars. We have 5 Class 3 officers who work every day of every school year on site, and they are on site in their patrol cars. We also have limited building access. It's limited through 1 doorway. And as many of the parents know on this call, it's not an open door. We are pretty restrictive about who's coming into the building. Unless you have a scheduled appointment, you're not granted access to the building. Things that are dropped off remain outside. Students who need to get picked up, they come to you. So we really do a great job of keeping everything really tight. We also have emergency notifications in place. We have security cameras. We've mapped evacuation routes. We have participated in a critical response mapping, which means that all of our Freehold Township Police Department, our state partners, our prosecutor's office, all have maps of critical infrastructure should we ever need to implement it. This referendum allows security vestibules to be built in each of our schools. So if you have entered one of our school buildings, you know, as soon as you open the door in all of our buildings, you have immediate access to a hallway where students are walking. This vestibule, the security vestibule, creates an additional layer. And what it will do is move that process into a closed, or it's referenced as a man trap informally, but it allows a closed space for when people have access to the building, that they would not be walking into our hallways. So that is a very powerful tool. It is a game changer. We've learned a lot from some of what has gone on in our country, and this is something that, in my opinion, is essential to our operations. Again, as you know, if you're a parent, when you come to the door, you have to have your ID. We scan your ID. We have a background system that checks that ID before you're granted access if you do have a meeting. That still will remain in place. Our security cameras will be enhanced. But like I said, this vestibule will essentially allow anyone who's coming in to attend a meeting or participate or speak at a career day or whatever it is they're at school for. It allows them to stay in a confined space in this office where additional verifications could happen. A staff member could come and meet with them and then walk them to the destination. So it's an added level of security. I know that Ms. Arman is going to speak about the pod structure, and that if you are an Erickson parent or an Applegate parent, that I believe is your school safety priority in this referendum, is the depodding of our schools and adding locked doorways to those buildings. But I will let, I believe I'm turning it over to Bob, and Oka will eventually go into some more detail about those plans.
Thank you, Diane. So we're going to take an opportunity. These are some of the pictures in the next couple slides of our existing infrastructure and what it might look like. So as Dr. Brethauer just described, what you'll see where it says security vestibule location, this is what all of our schools look like right now. You come into the building once you're buzzed in, and you're immediately in the hallway. All of our offices are across the hall. They're not in eyesight of the person coming in. We have to rely on what's on the video camera here. So what we're proposing to do in all of our schools is to, if you look over on the right there, is our offices, all that aren't in the front, will come to the front of the building. There will be 2 separate doors for students and staff to come in versus another one for the public. You will be buzzed into a small room. That's what we're witnessing here from another school district. Once you're buzzed into that room, there'll be a window there in which one of our office assistants or secretaries will greet you. You will provide your ID. If you pass the background clearance, you'll be buzzed into then the main office. From there, which you will then wait for someone to escort you to your location, which is very different from what we have now. Again, you look at that picture over on my left. You come in and we're relying on your honesty to come directly across the hallway to the main office. And so that is a significant change for all of our buildings. And as Dr. Brethauer said, it's the next stage in evolution for us in our target hardening of our schools. I think we're on to the next slide now. All right. So what you'll see here on my left, that is a picture of one of the classrooms in the ECLC. That is a horizontal univentilator. We have a number of our schools in which the majority of classrooms are heated and cooled from these UVs. That would be the ECLC, Katina, Eisenhower, and Barkalow. A lot of the other schools have majority of rooftop units, but again, as I said in the beginning part of the presentation, these UVs were, most of them were brand new in 2002 to 2004 when they were installed. They are now at the end of their useful life. Again, there are many of these units they no longer make motors for. So if the motor goes on the UV, it's now non-operational. And again, in the beginning, when I moved my chair to the side, you could see I have a portable in my office. I think I gave my motor down to a classroom a few years ago. I've had the portable here for a while. And so we are now at a point in time where we are providing a lot of temporary heating and cooling to our students and staff through portable units. Again, every day at 7:30, I on my way into work, I get an update from our facility manager, and I'm always saying a prayer that, hey, hopefully something else didn't go down today. So that's an example of that. On the other side there, you'll see these are some of the smaller boilers that we have that were installed in 2004 in all of our kindergarten pods. They're at the end of their useful life as well. They are also in a very odd location. They are above the classrooms, and we've had some instances where there's some coils above the classrooms that when the coils don't operate properly, they will freeze and then break. And they have damaged some of our supplies and our closet areas in our classroom. So the idea here would be to get newer boilers and then to bring them down to the first floor where they won't do any additional damage to our schools. And then briefly, and before I turn over to Mrs. Arman, when I've presented with Mr. Dickstein to our PTOs and our staff that aren't over at Applegate or at Erickson, I always ask them the question, what's different about the schools there? And some people know, but most don't. There are no doors on the classrooms. These 2 buildings were built about the same time, I think in 71 and 72. At that time, there was an architectural concept for collaboration spaces. These are temporary walls that are up. Even what divides the classrooms, they're not permanent walls. And so we have an issue here where it's noisy in that space, as well as when we go into lockdown drills, we can't operate the way that we do in our other schools. And then if you look over the right, that's what we're all used to. We're all used to coming to a classroom. This is over at Katina. And when we have a lockdown drill, the door is closed and the staff member locks from the inside, and the students and staff do what they're trained to do. Part of the referendum will also include replacing all the interior doors district-wide. I think we did a lot of installs back in the last referendum. And I do know that at some point in time, I think Mr. Dickstein led the effort. We had an old locking system back then. This is pre-lockdown drills where staff would have to grab the key, open the door, and actually go out into the hallway and lock the door. We've replaced those locks, but again, these doors are over 20 years old. The locking mechanisms are 20 years old. So part of the referendum would be to replace all the interior and exterior doors and bring in the most latest and greatest safety devices. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Arman, who is our principal of the Erickson Elementary School.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to speak to you from my personal experience about how the conditions at our elementary schools directly impacts our children, our teachers, and our entire community. Last year at Erickson School, we faced a serious crisis that highlighted the urgent need for building upgrades. 4 of our 7 heating units in the building failed. It was like dominoes falling, first one unit, then a few weeks later, the next one, and then several weeks later, another, leaving us scrambling to find alternative heating sources for our students. We were forced to consider relocating students to other schools, a decision that would have disrupted learning even further. Instead, we moved teachers and students out of their classrooms for several days while we worked on a solution. When portable heating units were brought in, we faced another challenge, our outdated electrical system. The additional power demand caused circuits to trip, meaning teachers had to limit their use of computers, projectors, and even pencil sharpeners until emergency electrical upgrades could be made to our building. Even with the temporary heating, we had another concern, which was air quality. We consulted with specialists, and with their guidance, we monitored classrooms several times a day to ensure that there was enough fresh air for our students and staff. While the district's actions were successful in heating classrooms and providing fresh air, imagine trying to focus on learning while constantly adjusting to fluctuating temperatures and having concerns about air quality. The effects of our aging building crisis weren't limited to just Marshall Erickson. As everyone's well aware, Laura Donovan's school was forced to relocate due to HVAC issues that caused mold to proliferate. I know that we are all clearly aware of how this affected our Laura Donovan family. While less talked about, the impacts of the crisis rippled throughout our entire district. Here at Erickson, along with the other elementary schools, some of our classrooms and staff were displaced to other learning spaces. Housing Donovan's staff and students meant the loss of critical student resources like our sensory room, our book room, and even our kindergarten cafeteria. Busing schedules were affected, resulting in some students arriving before the school day began and other students still in our buildings well beyond the scheduled end of the day, which both required additional supervision. Even the daily flow of arrival and dismissal was disrupted, creating confusion and frustration for students, staff, and parents. Outside of the school day, our PTO and our student clubs lost access to their regular meeting spaces, impacting extracurricular activities that enrich our children's lives. The reality is clear. Our school buildings are aging, and without proper funding, we will continue to face these challenges. The funds from this referendum ensure that no student has to learn in a classroom that's too cold, has mold, lacks proper ventilation, or an appropriate electrical supply. It will prevent future emergencies like these and provide our children with the facilities that they deserve. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Dickstein.
Thank you, Ms. Arman. Tonight, we have Olka Panchal and Steve Siegel from Spiesel Architectural Group. They will talk more specifically about each project.
Thank you, Mr. Dickstein. Before we begin looking at the proposal school by school, it's important to note that the original proposal that would have addressed each and every item across the district came in at over $200 million. The district decided to focus only on the most critically needed updates, and that's the pared down proposal that we will go through tonight, and that's what the voters will see on the ballot on March 11th. The projects fall into 3 major categories: critical MEP upgrades. MEP stands for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. This accounts for 38% of the proposed project cost. Projects in this category include HVAC, controls, plumbing and electrical system upgrades, boiler replacement, pump replacement associated with the boilers, with all associated architectural work. District has addressed a lot of HVAC needs with various different funding sources in the past few years. However, there is still a large amount of equipment beyond its life expectancy and a need for replacement. The proposed HVAC controls will enable the facility staff to remotely manage temperature and humidity in each space across the district, which is needed for the size of the district we have. Security and safety upgrades account for 37% of the project cost, which includes projects like interior doors with security hardware upgrades, permanent walls and doors with security hardware in the classroom pods at Applegate and Erickson schools, CCTV camera installation at each access point at all 8 facilities, fire alarm system upgrades and ADA upgrades. Proposed fully addressable fire alarm system upgrade will locate the exact equipment with overheating or fire concerns, helping the first responders and facilities with reduction in the response time in those critical situations. The security vestibule upgrades will provide a separate entrance for the visitors to go through 3 layers of security check before they are allowed to enter in the main building. The visitors will have to go through a security check-in to be able to enter the main office, from where they will be escorted in the building with the staff if need be. This work will also address some accessibility deficiencies in the nurse's office area and the restrooms that are in the nurse's office. It will also upgrade the existing nurse's office to house private exam rooms, sufficient storage, and the ADA restrooms, as I noted before. Remaining of the 25% of the project cost would go toward building envelope upgrades. This includes roofing upgrades, exterior door and security hardware replacement, window replacement, and exterior stair replacement. District has installed a new roofing system at 2 schools with critical roofing issues from other funding sources. However, there are 6 remaining schools that are also in need for roofing replacement are included in this proposal. Now I'll go through each school individually to go by what scope is included for that particular school. We'll start with Applegate Elementary School. Applegate School will receive all the MEP security building envelope upgrades. However, there is one point unique about Applegate Elementary School, which is classroom pods. The security concern in the classroom pods is unique to Applegate and Erickson Elementary Schools. The picture on the slide shows you what the typical classroom pod looks like at Applegate and Erickson schools. These classrooms are arranged in an open space where each class has a designated room around the perimeter with a common area in the middle. These rooms currently do not have permanent walls with doors. This proposal will address this need while keeping the central collaboration space available for use. At Katina Elementary School, we have all the scheduled MEP and security as well as building envelope upgrades similar to Applegate. They obviously do not have classroom parts, so that part is not included for Katina Elementary School. Barcalow Middle School will also receive all the upgrades similar to the other 2 schools. In addition to those items, Barcalow would also receive replacement of some aging electrical equipment. These panels are outdated, hard to find parts for, therefore they are also included. There are some other schools in the district where they have already taken care of some of the aging electrical equipment, with some schools still needing the replacement. Barcalow being one of them will receive this upgrade as part of this proposal. Donovan Elementary School will also receive MEP security and other interior ADA related upgrades. What's unique about Donovan is Donovan School just received a new roofing system in the last 2 years. So that part is not included. Remaining of the upgrades that are being proposed at other schools are being proposed at Donovan Elementary School as well. Same thing with Eisenhower Middle School. Eisenhower Middle School is scheduled to receive all of the MEP security, safety, and building envelope upgrades. They currently do not have a secure vestibule. That part is also included as part of the security upgrades at the school. And finally, Erickson Elementary School. If you are familiar with these two schools, Erickson and Applegate schools are identical schools. So Erickson Elementary School also has 3 classroom pods without permanent walls and doors. Obviously, that is a huge security concern. So that is an additional piece similar to Applegate Elementary School that is being proposed for this school to build permanent walls, security hardware with new doors in these classrooms, while keeping the main collaboration open space that's in the pod area available for use once these security upgrades are addressed. Finally, Early Childhood Learning Center. This is a very old building. All of the other MEP security and building envelope upgrades are proposed at this building. However, this being an old building, their exterior shell requires window replacement, which is also included. There is an exterior stair that is a need for replacement, which is also included as part of this proposal. The school also has very outdated HVAC system in place for a portion of the building. This is a steam-based HVAC system, which is very outdated, and it's in need for replacement. So that part will be addressed as part of this proposal. West Freehold Elementary, unlike Early Childhood Learning Center, this is the newest school we have. It's also 25 years old building, but this has some needs in terms of HVAC upgrades, security upgrades, which is covered. West Freehold School just received a new roofing system in the last 2 years, so that part is not included. They also received a lot of rooftop unit replacement work, which was addressed outside of this proposal. District took care of the rooftop unit replacement project from some other funding sources. However, there are a lot of mechanical equipment throughout this building, which is in the interior, in the classrooms, above the corridor, which is in need for replacement. That part is included as part of this proposal.
Thank you. We're going to move into the question and answer portion of this evening. There are 2 ways that you can submit a question. The first is, you'll notice on the bottom, I believe, on your screen, there's a Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll group similar questions together. You can also email vote@freeholdtwp.k12.nj.us. That email address will be available throughout the time between now and the referendum vote, and you will receive answers to those questions via email. We'll start this evening. The first question is for Mr. Salamini. We stated that the state provides up to 40% in state aid. Is there a scenario in which the state does not pay the full 40%? Will the state pay up to 40% this year, or is it a yearly program?
That's a great question, Mr. Dickstein. So the aid that this law has been provided under has been in existence for about 25 years. For the first 11 or 12 years of this law, the state fully funded the debt service aid. And for the last 14 or so years, the state has provided 85% of that. So that's why your financial advisor has run projections at 34%, because that is what history has told us over the last 14 years the state has been allocating for these approved projects. So that's why the board felt it was most conservative to not say, hey, we could get up to this amount, but to show you what districts have actually been getting over the last 14 years. They thought that was the most fair way to do it and the most conservative.
Thank you. I'll take the next question, which is regarding the increase in property taxes. Recognizing that there has been an increase in property taxes going into this year, will the buildings fall apart or cause physical harm to our children if this measure fails? The short answer to that is yes. We are currently experiencing issues in which our children are not learning consistently in safe and healthy environments. Ms. Arman shared with you earlier in the presentation the impact in her building at Erickson with issues with HVAC units. When those HVAC units are not functioning and we have to use temporary units, it impacts the flow of air in the building. And we have custodial staff taking CO2 readings throughout the day to ensure the air quality is safe for our staff and our students. We're familiar with the Laura Donovan School. Miss Arman mentioned it, but for those that don't know, the Laura Donovan School was closed for the fall of this school year due to mold in the building. And again, not being an expert on HVAC, my contention still remains that if we had efficient HVAC units and unit ventilators, that it would have prevented that mold from growing in a very humid summer. We have 2 boilers at Donovan that both failed just last week. We had to relocate students because of a smell of gas out of those areas to a different part of the building and move parts from one boiler to another in order to get that boiler fired up again. And we're waiting now for a repair on the other boiler. So yes, already with just those few examples in just this school year alone, not referring back to other school years, our students will not continue to learn in a safe and effective environment without this referendum.
Neil, I just want to jump in real quick. And so what people need to know too is the rooftop units over at Laura Donovan School have the same component that the one at Erickson did. And every day that goes by is another day we're waiting for them to fail. So if they go down, we're going to have the same situation there where until we can replace the units, we'll have to provide temporary heat. And we'll have the same types of conditions there. So I believe there's 4 or 5 rooftop units in which I spoke with our facility director. And he said, yes, the heat exchanger on those is, they're well past their useful life. So yes, there are more problems that could come if we don't get this work done.
And those are just a few examples that happened since September, and they're happening daily. Mr. DeVita, can you answer the question and tell us about the process of planning that's involved with the referendum and the timing of the votes?
Sure. So we officially started this process in December of 23. That's when the board formally engaged with Spiegel Architecture Firm to begin this work. What happened at that point in time was I already had a list of projects through our long-range facility plan that we knew had to be done. They were provided that list. And then we walked the buildings with the architects and engineers and our principals. And this is where we've mentioned a couple of times, the original list of projects was over $200 million. We asked the principals, what things in your building would you want to repair and change? And we came up with a whole list of projects. And again, when we brought back that number to the board said, all right, we need to work backwards here and we need to focus on only those things that are critical and that will provide us the maximum amount of funding from the state. And that's where we ended up on this $135 million referendum question. And so since then, once the board decided on that, what projects would be done, then Spiegel had to go back and work with the Department of Education and submit applications on a project by project basis. And at which time, I believe it took the Department of Ed, it was about 3 months to review. There was a lot of back and forth with it. And this is because the DOE, they know they are on the hook for up to 40% of funding here. And so eventually, I believe it was around November, December when we had, no, I'm sorry, a little bit earlier than that, we had all the projects finally approved by the DOE. So it is a very long process. We've been doing this for over a year. We've had a lot of conversations with the architect, a lot of conversations with the state. And ultimately, it brought us out to December when the board approved the final question. And then since then, we've been doing a slow rollout of the referendum to the community, given the holidays. And now we are getting closer and closer to the referendum date, and that's why you're hearing more and more about it. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. Ms. Akampora, can you share the difference in interest rates, being that these are municipal bonds?
Sure. As I mentioned before, these are tax exempt municipal bonds. So the investors that buy these bonds don't have to pay taxes on the interest for the bonds. So that's why they're lower than what we would get for a mortgage. You know, mortgage rates are probably 6 to 7% right now. And the rate that we used was 4%. Again, we did these projections months ago. Our office sells bonds all the time. We had a couple of 20-year comparable sales this week, and the rates were in the 3.65 to 3.75 range. So hopefully when we do sell Freehold Township's bonds, they will be lower than the 4% that we have projected.
Thank you. That same question mentioned the production and import of R22 refrigerant. And yes, we did point out that the R22 refrigerant was banned in 2020. However, those units, air conditioning and heat pumps that use R22 It is still permitted in those existing units. However, it's very hard to find and it's become very costly when it is found. Bob, can you share how much the district receives in federal aid and grants? There's some concern about what's happening in Washington and uncertainty about federal aid. Do we have contingency plans if we use federal aid? And would we have to do something with the tax levy if federal funding was decreased?
So we receive approximately $1.2 million in federal aid. A large majority of that comes from the IDEA grants. That's about $975,000. And the rest comes from the title grants, primarily Title I. It is the title grants that we've been told by the state, and this is even prior to the election, that those title grants were going to be reduced from the federal government to the state of New Jersey. It won't impact us significantly. It's a lot of little pockets of money here or there. IDA, I've not been told that there's anything going on with that. And as again, we don't get a lot of money if you want to compare us to Asbury Park, Neptune, Camden, some of your other districts that are have significant socioeconomic disadvantages compared to Freehold Township. So it is not a major issue for us at this point in time.
Thank you. Mr. Salamini, if this fails, will the project still occur over a much longer time period without a tax increase?
So unfortunately, I think as Mr. DeVita pointed out, you guys your budget is very difficult and it's going to continue to receive extreme pressure. So it's going to be impossible to address these capital projects of this size in your general fund operating budget, even though your board and your administration has done a really good job of addressing as many projects as they can. To be able to address projects of this size and this nature is just not feasible. And that's why you see projects this size in your neighboring communities and throughout the state. And that's why there's numerous other referendum in March, because no school district, no matter how well they budget and how well they save money, has the ability to address these projects. And if you did it under your current general fund, you'd be trying to do them without the debt service aid. So really as Mr. DeVita pointed out, and as your board president pointed out earlier, that's one of the main reasons why they decided to go for a referendum and to prioritize the projects so that almost all of the projects are receiving that debt service aid from the state. So it would be financially virtually impossible to address these projects within your general fund, and it would take years upon years. And your projects, it doesn't sound like their useful lives have that long until you could save enough money to even address a portion of those projects.
Mr. DeVita, can you answer this question? Is there a plan to address the projects that did not make the cut for this referendum so that we can possibly avoid another referendum sooner than later?
Sure. The majority of the other projects that did not make the cut, a lot of them were nice to do projects. So there's a lot of bathrooms in our district that need to be renovated. It's probably the original tile that was put down when that bathroom was built. It's kind of like walking to an ugly house. And so these are things that we can do with our capital reserve dollars over the long term. None of these are critical that if they fail, there's no danger of any of these projects failing, that we're going to shut down a school. The only significant things that we pulled out, again, that could be done probably with capital reserve dollars in the future, would be redesigning the parking lots over at Applegate and over at Donovan. If you're a parent there, you'll know how congested they are. Unfortunately, there's no funding for those. Those are site upgrades, and the state wouldn't provide any funding anyway. So we would look to do that with future capital reserve dollars. And then the windows in a number of the other buildings. Those are the only things that are, big that are out. Otherwise, again, it's a lot of things that need to be spruced up. Our cafeterias could probably use some funding to update them, renovate the stages. But again, there's nothing that we left out that's critical, that if it fails, we're going to be closing a school.
Can you also share the costs involved with the referendum process?
So up front, they've been minimal. right? The board isn't really, the architect doesn't do full designs. They provide to the DOE some brief drawings. It's not like you're going out for a full bid where there's a cost for it. So again, our upfront costs have been minimal to the Board of Ed and to the taxpayer.
Can you also explain why it's economical to use a referendum to achieve these projects?
It is economical for two reasons. One, again, it's about the money. We're either going to pay for 100% of these projects on our own, which is going to be very difficult to do. By not passing the referendum, we forego the up to 40% funding from the state of New Jersey. And the other thing is we get them all done at once. If we continue to have to be selective and pick and choose, we do run into the danger of a system failing here or there. And as Mrs. Orman said before, I mean, she's experienced it the last year. It will or could have impact on our staff and our students and how they're educated here. And again, I think we talked about this, Robbie mentioned it, and I might have mentioned before too. It's like when you take out a home equity loan for, large projects in your home, you get all the money up front, you get the projects done up front, and then you pay them back over a period of time. And again, we would be paying back the debt on these bonds over a 20-year period of time, which would tie into the expected useful life of the projects.
There was also a question about why does a 5-year-old school already need replacement and repairs? Our most recent school that was built is 25 years old, and much of the equipment, boilers, HVAC, the useful life for that equipment is 20 years. So we're 5 years beyond the useful life of the equipment in that school. So 25 years is the school that is the most recently built. Mrs. Punchal, can you answer the question, how long would it take to see the upgrades in the schools?
Sure, yeah. So let's say if the referendum passes on March 11th, we will then start the design. It does take time to put together the bid packages. We have a very big project. We will subdivide the projects per the scope. So we have MEP, roofing, some interior work with the GC need. Those packages will roll out as they're done. We do not anticipate anything to mobilize in terms of construction until the summer of 26. So the first project that will roll out will be 26. However, some secure vestibule and interior alteration work that's included in this proposal will require more time in design, plus permitting, as well as construction. The classroom pods that we have in the scope, there is 24 classrooms in each building at Applegate and Erickson School. So all of those classrooms cannot be done in one summer. So those have to be phased out. Summer 1 will take care of some, summer 2 will take care of some other rooms. In summary, we will see these projects under construction over the course of like 2 to 3 years from the date of the referendum.
Mr. DeVita, if $140 million is received, what's the plan for unspent cash over the 2-year project, as all of it will take 2 years to spend?
So, and Tony, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Anything that's unspent at the end has to come back to pay. We usually would use that to pay down the debt service on our part. That's been my experience in other referendums that I've been involved in.
Bob is correct. And also too, during that construction period, assuming we issue all the bonds in one tranche, the board will be able to invest those bond proceeds until the projects are done. And, we're kind of in an interesting interest rate environment right now where the short-term rates are pretty good. So the board will be able to make a decent amount of money while they're paying debt service on that money to offset that interest cost during the construction period.
Mr. DeVita, another one for you. If the bond is not approved, would the $37 monthly amount increase?
So again, I guess the question really goes to what's the board going to do if this doesn't pass? And so the earliest we can go back out is 6 months from now, which would be September of 25. If market conditions change, then absolutely, it could cost you more. And plus the longer it takes us to get this passed and get the work started, the more inflation will hit into the cost of labor and the cost of the equipment itself. So yes, it could cost more than if we delay this. Is that fair to say, Robbie? And rates could go up, market conditions could be worse at that period of time?
Yes, I agree. We just don't know what rates are gonna be, so that's, that's a big unknown. And I think escalation is a big factor. You don't know how much higher, things are gonna cost. And the other thing is, this debt service aid has been around for a while, and it's important to take advantage of it now. Um, at the end of the last financial crisis, the governor stopped approving projects. Now, if you were already in and you had your bonds sold, you still got your debt service aid. But if this referendum didn't pass and you had to resubmit projects in the fall or next year, and there's a new governor in, you may not necessarily get these things approved. I mean, we did live through that, like 2010, 2011. For a couple of years, everything was put on hold. But they did come back and they did start funding them again. So, as we mentioned before, once you get these letters, you're in for getting this debt service aid. But, I always feel like in the back of my mind, that's a risk too. For newer projects, again, if, once you get that letter, you're committed and you'll be getting the debt service aid once we sell the bonds.
Olga, there's a question specific to windows, and that question is, are the windows that we're going to be using as replacements, are they unbreakable?
So the glazing in the windows can be upgraded to a lot of different levels in terms of how they withstand any kind of like a shooter attack or any other attack. There are multiple ways to achieve that. The glazing itself can be upgraded. So those are the specification that we haven't really, put together yet. That happens post successful approval of the referendum. But yes, the contingencies and the costs for such upgrades as security film, some substantial glazing system are included in the budget and the cost estimates that we have for that work.
Mr. DeVita, if mechanical units are described as well past their useful life, why were these not addressed before facing potential catastrophic breakdowns? And what's the long-term maintenance plan if life expectancy is 20 years?
So, this board, we started to take up the conversation of a referendum, and then the little thing called COVID happened. And, we put everything to the side because it was a great unknown. There was a lot of other things. So once we had passed that crisis, we began the conversation again. I know Mr. Dickstein has said this in a number of the presentations that we've made. I think because we've spent $13 million in maintaining our systems, over the last 20 years, or last 10 years, spent $13 million, but because we do spend dollars on maintaining our systems, we have kept them operating up to this point. Again, like I said, we had conversations just prior to COVID, and then once COVID happened, the conversation shut down as we had to deal with that crisis.
I'll take the next question, which is asking if a brand new school has been considered. So new construction was discussed, but ultimately it wasn't pursued because it's not the most cost-effective solution for the district or for the Freehold Township property taxpayers. Renovating existing buildings is significantly more economical, particularly because of that availability of up to 40% of state aid that's provided for those projects. The state does provide financial assistance for school construction based on the number of unhoused students for whom there's not enough classrooms. Since our schools do have adequate capacity for our student population, new construction will receive little to no state aid. Nearly every improvement proposed in the referendum qualifies for the maximum amount of state aid, which is up to 40% of the eligible cost. For Freehold Township, this amounts to about $45 million in state funding to help modernize and improve our schools. Additionally, our buildings themselves are structurally sound and well maintained. Foundations, framing, and overall construction remain in good condition, making renovations a smarter investment. By upgrading rather than replacing the buildings, we extend their lifespan for decades while making essential improvements for students and staff at a much lower cost than building a new facility. The next question is something that we've discussed in our in-person visits in our prior forum, which is a perception that when we closed Donovan, that was effective, and therefore we do have space to close a school and redistrict all students to the other schools, 4 other elementary schools. Ms. Arman did articulate well in her portion of the presentation that That relocation was an emergency situation. It was not ideal. Giving more detail than Ms. Armand did in her overview, there were classrooms that were relocated within the existing building. So in our elementary schools, there were some classrooms that are smaller number of students that had to move into office space. There were classrooms where children learned in the kindergarten cafeteria. We didn't have access for all of our students to the gym. We have one gymnasium and up sometimes 8 grade levels in a building that need access to that gym. Our lunch periods were overcrowded. Transportation was a significant issue throughout that time. And we also know from our township administrator that in the next 5 to 8 years, there will be 1,000 additional units built within Freehold Township. So at this time, it is not a prudent solution to close schools and redistrict. Mr. DeVita, have we considered more efficient systems such as solar panels or geothermal heating that can mitigate future energy costs?
So in terms of solar panels, you need to have new roofs in place prior to putting panels on. We've had this discussion with the board before. I think Mr. Amoroso was a big proponent of this going back 5 or 6 years ago. And at that time, it was the same answer. We need new roofs first. The solar companies, typically through what's called a power purchasing agreement, will not put solar on your roof if they have to take it off in 3 or 4 more years. So our plan right now is get the roofs up. And once the roofs are up, then we will explore solar, whether through purchasing, if it makes sense, or through a power purchasing agreement where we lease our roof space and we have a reduced energy cost for our schools going forward. In terms of geothermal, I think I know they explored that with the West Freehold School 25 years ago, and it turned out to be at the time too costly. I don't think that was an option for us, and Olga can correct me if she's wrong. Basically, our plan was to replace in kind with the units that we currently have.
That's correct.
Bob, you may want to also mention about our ESIP that we went through recently.
So when I mentioned before that the board has exhausted all the opportunities for other sources of funding, about 6 years ago, we did embark on an energy savings improvement plan. And that is a plan by which the state and the Board of Public Utilities allows you to make energy improvements to your schools and pay back all that new equipment over a 15-year period of time through the energy savings. So we're in year 3 or year 4 of completion of that project. Most of our savings is coming from lighting, but we were able to get a brand new boiler to replace the 50-year-old boiler it's down in the ECLC. We did have some new HVAC. We were able to convert some electric powered HVAC into natural gas. But we did take advantage of that, and it's something at no cost to the taxpayer. We're able to make, again, about $6.5 million of capital improvements.
I'll answer the next question, which is which projects would be cut if this referendum fails? Unfortunately, we would have to reevaluate all the projects that are in there, which we did share or identified as needs and not wants. What we'd have to look at is those that are required and necessary to maintain our school operations. And those are the HVAC, roofing, and electrical systems. Unfortunately, we would have to put all of the plans that are connected to safety and security to the side and prioritize HVAC, roofing, and heating. And this exemplifies well that component, so that 37%, roughly, most of that 37% in security and safety upgrades would have to come out of the referendum. We'd have to prioritize that mechanical, electrical, plumbing, secure, and building envelope upgrades. There's another question coming in, so just give me 1 second. So the next question is from Mr. DeVita, and it talks about that $13 million. We've gotten this question prior as well. The $13 million that we've expended over the course of 10 years in maintenance. The question is about then the savings. Can you talk about how that money will still have to be spent to sustain the new systems that are in place?
So even though you know, if we were to pass referendum and get all this brand new equipment, it still needs to be maintained, filter changes, just like at your home, if you take a home maintenance plan for your HVAC, lubricate the systems, check the belts, monitor the controls. So we would still, I can't imagine a scenario where we would be dramatically reducing our maintenance budget, because again, we have a lot of equipment here. We have over 700,000 square feet of building space. We have probably close to 200 plus HVAC and unit ventilators combined. So in order to maintain them and to keep them in tip-top shape so they last at least 20 years again, we would have to continue to on with our maintenance program. So.
Mr. Salamini, why do we need to both issue bonds and raise taxes? There are two different sources of revenue.
So you issue bonds to borrow the funds to pay the cost of construction. And then that loan or that bond has to be paid back. And that's paid back from two sources, from raising taxes and from the debt service from the state.
Thank you. So at this time, it looks like we've answered all the questions. That concludes our presentation. I would like to thank the Board of Education, professional consultants, and our district staff members who were here. And I'd especially like to thank the audience for taking time out of their evening to listen to our presentation. We hope it's given you an understanding of the bond referendum and the benefits it will provide to our district and to our community now and in the future. We're making every effort to reach every member of the community with this information to ensure that they have all that they need to make an informed vote on March 11th. The website, the district website, freeholdtwp.k12.nj.us/vote is the best place to find updated information. Each time we get questions or we're hearing information in our community, we do update the frequently asked questions page. So keep an eye on that page specifically. It's updated routinely and it has a great deal of information. There you can also find voting information, date, polling locations, and times that the polls will be open, how to register to vote, and how to get an absentee ballot. If there's something that you don't see an answer to and you would like to know, on that page, there's an email address. It's also on the screen now, vote@freeholdtwp.k12.nj.us. Please make every effort to be present and vote on March 11th. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., and it is your usually polling places. Mail-in ballots must be postmarked by March 11th. And thank you for attending this evening, and everybody have a great night.